So, welcome to Microsoft Expression for Developers, Demystifying User Interface Design. My name is Brian Randall, and this session is not going to make you a user design expert. And I can pretty much guarantee that if you don't have any concept of good layout, design, or color, you will not leave this session being able to do it either. So I apologize. I can't perform miracles. And I'm sorry? No, you guys, I'll take my licking. The idea behind this session is very specific. And so, like it or love it, we'll find out. This is the first time I've done this session in public as opposed to dealing with customers and talking about this. My primary background is a developer. However, I have a fetish for good design, and as such, in university, I took typography and design and did classes on color theory and things like that. But I still don't get paid to do that because I still am more of a developer. But I do find where we're going with user interface design to be pretty compelling. And so the idea is, where do you start? And when we think about starting, it starts with understanding what you're trying to accomplish and who you're trying to accomplish it for. John Harris from Microsoft, we went over my story and slides, so I want to thank him. So, with user interface design, unfortunately, all the great technology we have can be used for evil. Or how about IE's contribution to the world? Unfortunately, sometimes we go the other extreme, right? We think we're on the right side of the force. We think we're that gentleman from the IBM commercial. In fact, that's where I really wanted to put that little slide. So the URL will be on your download that you can look at and watch it again. I do find it humorous. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're really looking to do is get a little bit of Han and Chewie going on. Now you wonder, what? Okay, so on one hand, you get these great technologies that let you do, spinning logos and fire and blinking and marquees and all that good stuff. And trust me, with XAML and Blend, you can create those type of offensive user interfaces. And I'm not going to show you one bit how to do it. I will not show you one animation trick. I thought about it. We were going to do some. We thought about it, but I turned out, no, that's too dangerous. Step back. Start simple. But when we think about what would Han and Chewie do, at the end of the day, Han has a heart of gold. And Chewie, his faithful Wookiee, right, dog, man dog, whatever you want to call him, stands behind him. At the same time, they do wreak a little bit of havoc, right? I still remember that scene in Star Wars where the stormtroopers start shooting at him, and Han just loses his mind. He loses it. He cracks. He just starts running after the stormtroopers. Exactly. And then he pauses and says, whoa, wait a minute, I'm doing the wrong thing, and runs back. When we think about user interface design for developers, what I need to get you to do is believe in the need for it, whether you can do it or not. Now, why are you here? Hopefully it's because you want to build a better user interface, a user experience, something that's better looking, better functioning, and better feeling. The thing is, once again, I can't do that in 75 minutes. I don't know if I could have done it to myself, and I'm still into this over 20 years. But what I can start with you is start thinking about what tools do you have available to get you on the right path, and how to start thinking about this so that moving forward, you can do the right thing. Why do your users want you here? Well, it's simple. Every user wants a quality experience. Now, when you think about what does that mean? What is a quality experience? Well, to me, a quality experience is four things. The first thing is that it's intuitive, and that's kind of what we're talking about here, is that we really want to design our application's experience, its flow, the piece that the user deals with, to be intuitive. Now, what that means will vary from application to application, right? And you would argue that one of the things that we have held to be good and true has been wrong. What we've held to be good and true is repetition, standardization. Right? Apple started this out with their common design standards on the Macintosh and how you had to do things. Menus had to be a certain place, right? The menu bar was up top. They had some very specific rules. And Microsoft adopted it. I have books at home on my shelf from the original Windows 3X design guidelines from Microsoft Press. Anybody have any of those? With the floppy disk, that's the best part. The key to understand is that when we think about intuitive design, stop following the rules, start breaking the rules. Yeah, I know that sounds weird. That sounds wrong. But fundamentally, breaking the rules means doing what's best for the users. And doing what's best for the users is not following a cookie-cutter recipe for UX design. That's why I'm not going to give you one. Because whatever I show you might not work for your users. The key is to start thinking from the beginning and saying, I do want to think about my user. Now, other things that you as developers, I would expect you to do is think about availability, right? The days of the application that's only available 9 to 5 are gone. People want applications that are available when they need it. So that includes the front-end systems as well as the back-end. They want to be fast, right? I don't care how pretty your application is, but if it's dog slow, they're not going to use it. They're not going to appreciate it. I mean, let's take the Apple iPad, right? Apple released the iPad 2, and they sold a bunch more. And you're like, why? Because not only did they do all the same things they did before, they had a crappy camera. And people were like, yeah, but I don't care because it's faster. You go to the store and you compare the first gen and the second one, it's noticeably faster on all the basic things. So anybody who waited was like, yeah, I was smart. I waited. I get the faster one. But then you look on eBay and look how many people are reselling their old first generation ones because they want the second one because it's faster. So style matters, experience matters, but dog slow does too. And ultimately, we live in a connected world. Right? People do not want applications that operate in a silo that are by themselves. So you got to take this all into account when you're thinking about your application. And that's why when I think about user interface design, I don't expect you to sit down and spend the moral equivalent of $1 million with design staff to build it. It's taking the baby steps and finding those little bits that will make the most satisfaction to your user. For example, modal dialogues. Right? Modal dialogues are the bane of just about every user. But why do we see them so often? Because it's easier for you. A modal dialogue is easier for you to implement because you can basically lock the user out of the rest of the application. You don't have to worry about what they're doing. So why should you care, right? When you think about your users, right, your users are not nameless, faceless entities in some crowd, right? They're not these unknown people from the Pink Floyd Wall video, right? When you think about users, it's your family. It's your grandmother. It's mine. She's 84 years old. It's your friends. And if I can appeal to you with some empathy, it's you. The more we put out crappy user experiences, the more we get. I firmly believe in karmic pay it forward. So for every gray screen you design, for every modal dialogue you implement, you're putting that negative energy in. So how are we going to make it better? Well, I have a fantasy that we'll start thinking about applications like an egg. An egg really is a beautiful design, right? Has a very nice shape, right? No two eggs are ever exactly alike, although I'm sure there's some mathematician here who could say, well, actually, Brian, it turns out that 1 out of every 372,476 eggs are exactly the same, but okay. But think about your application, right? Think about what it means to the user or what it means to you when you're getting out to start. and you're thinking about, what would this look like? People have an idea of how an application is going to make their life better, right? And when I say make their life better, that varies, right? Because, arguably, if you're thinking about the person using a data entry application in accounting, how can that be something they want to make their life better? Well, because it can reduce their stress if it just works, right? If they don't have to, for example, go to one screen, write down a piece of information, and go to another screen because there's no way to cut and paste between it. There's no logical way to move the data forward, right? How many times have you been on tech support phone calls, right, where the person has to say, hold on, let me go to this other screen? Or my favorite, I fly a lot. 2 years ago, I cracked 1 million miles on United Airlines. That's what they call button seat miles. So anybody see Up in the Air with George Clooney? Yeah, good movie, but there's one little fallacy to it. They played a little game. See, American Airlines will allow you to accumulate status miles towards your special high-end million-miler, multi-million milers for your credit cards. That's why he spent all that money on food and other things. If you haven't seen it, well, too late. It's been on a DVD for a while. The point is, right, he did this crazy amount. I'm sorry, you do 9 million miles, you're crazy no matter how you do it, whether you spend it or fly it. But the crazy thing about it, as much as I've been flying United all these years, and I call up and I get the robot and I enter my ID, and the point is I'm supposed to go to the special queue and they're supposed to know who I am. About 1 out of 4 times, the person's asking me for my ID. Right? Now, it's gotten better. It's getting better, and I'm hopeful with this Continental merger that it'll go horrible for a while and get better. But the point is, it's things like that that start at the interface experience. Because what happens is, how do they make the distinction of where that data shows up? It's what's presented to the person on the phone, the screen, the user interface, right? The data that's made available. So when we start thinking about the vision, we often take that vision and we start defining specifications. We define requirements. And we sit down and we say, the egg will be beautiful. It will have this great shape. It will flow out of the chicken and into my frying pan. And this is where you got to sit down and be honest with yourself, is you want to start sketching out comps. This is something we do across industries, right? The movie industry is notable for it. They storyboard. You lay out with pen and paper, pencil and paper preferably, and if you're even into it, colored pencils and paper. You need to get back to where you were in kindergarten, right? My lovely daughter in that picture is 4.5 years old, and every day she comes home, and one of the things that will happen is sometimes my wife will pick her up before I get done with work, because when I'm home, I'm working out of the house. And so she'll want to come work with me. So I set her a little side, and she gets out her crayons. I was doing it with the tablet for a while, but then she started trying to figure out things on my tablet. So that kind of got out of hand real quick. So we stick to crayons. But you need to step back away from the technology and embrace that idea of sketching out the idea, the concept. It's amazing what you will not do when you write it out with pencil and paper versus when you can easily drag and drop it with a mouse. And this is where it becomes interesting. Everybody can do the previous part. But sometimes, depending on the application you're building, it would help if you had someone with graphic skills. Yes, that other D, the designer. I know. Our boss won't pay for it. Yeah, I understand. We don't like designers. They wear black turtlenecks. I understand. It's kind of weird because we have this animosity often between us, developers, and the IT pros, the people who run our networks. The other Ds, the draconians, who control our network. And so what it comes down to is we have this need sometimes to have a richer interface designed. And one of the gentlemen I was speaking to earlier brought up something that I thought I'd share with you guys. And I'm not out to offend anybody, but let's just take a look at this. So this first little piece, let me zoom in a little bit. Why Johnny can't design an interface? So first off is, when you look at a university web page, right? Things on the front page and things people go looking for. And that in that Venn diagram, that intersection point is you find out the name of the school, right? And that's part of the influence on that. I'm kind of ahead of myself with that one, but really it's the next piece that is worth scrolling down for. Our friend Dilbert. Now, what we see here is, I'll let you take a look at that. Now, as I look across the audience, I see a room full of developers. You're okay. You're not engineers. So pat yourself on the back. You're okay. But the point is, sometimes making friends with black turtlenecks isn't so bad. And that takes us back to that IBM commercial. I was the guy in the white shirt in the sense that I loved abusing the designers back in the 90s, right? When the web became cool, when Marquee and Blink hit on the thing. We did work for a graphic company that did printing, big printing presses, all that stuff. And so the designers were going to help do some stuff, and they built this website. And what they wanted to do was get all the stuff from the back end on the website. It was off a HP 9000 series, and we had to write some custom ODBC code, blah, blah, blah. But the funny thing of that was just it. They had no clue the back end. You have to be honest, right? We had no clue about the front end. So it's time to stop the war and stop making fun of each other and kind of say, you know, you want to have some fudge? You want some Hershey's chocolate kisses? And let's sit down and talk. Let's get together, and they can do stuff in tools like Photoshop, and you can import them into Blend and get us down the right path. And you know, in the old world, that's what we did, right? We started getting them to do comps and layouts in HTML and CSS. Problem is, that's usually what happened to the application, though, once we got a hold of it. Right? You get handed this beautiful, this delicate egg, this design. And our implementation turns out a little broken. So fundamentally, what I'm asking you to do is change your state of mind. Change the state of mind and empathize with who your user is. Right? Because unfortunately, sometimes our impression of the user is the user's liaison. Beware the user liaison. The person who speaks on behalf of the user, who knows what the user wants, who knows that the users are unwilling to change and are unwilling to accept any changes to the way the application works. It turns out that that person usually is just grade A trouble. They're not willing to accept that, yes, the users would like to be more productive, to have more. So we need to change. And moving forward, when we think about rich applications in the expression world, there's two ways to go. We're going to talk about Microsoft Expression Blend 4 and SketchFlow. And while this tool was not written for us, it is a tool that belongs in our toolbox. Particularly with the new features in SketchFlow, we have the ability to start empathizing without having design skills. That's pretty cool. I like that. Now, don't get me wrong. If you are a closet designer and you read the right books and you understand the concept behind, you know, color theory, and you hang out on websites like cooler.com and you have little, you know, moments where you find that right color scheme, more power to you. But what I'm going to show you is that any of you can go out of here and build a better user interface. But it's not just going to be because of the tool. It's because you're going to use the tool with the target of your affection rather than the target of your abuse. Because let's be honest, sometimes we do stuff in the application because we know it's going to annoy them. And some of you are just laughing because you know I'm right. And others are like, how could you ever do that? Because they're developers. So the first thing to understand about using Blend is that it is something that is going to be side by side. Something you're going to use as part of an integrated workflow between that and Visual Studio. So in my demonstrations, I'm using Blend 4 with SketchFlow. So that comes in the Ultimate Edition. And I happen to be using Visual Studio Ultimate, but that's irrelevant. It's part of this. What's great about this is that Blend is going to be your primary tool to work on XAML-based user interfaces. So conceptually, though, XAML and HTML share a same common background that we need to be aware of and appreciate. Once again, going back to Marquee and Blink, right? XAML doesn't have those exact tags, but I sure as heck can cause havoc on the screen with a little bit of XAML and a few little behaviors and some animation panels. Okay? Thou shalt not go crazy with animation. And please stay away from garish color schemes. Now, when we think about this then, we can build applications for WPF, Silverlight, and Windows Phone 7. And so at least out of all that stuff up there, one of those at least isn't going away anytime soon. When we think about building these interfaces then, we're thinking about, okay, what is the primary goal of the application? Does it have anything in common? And how can we go through and design this? Now, when we think about the baseline workflow then, I'm going to build Visual Studio projects using C# or VB primarily. And I can use the integrated support for Team Foundation Server and get things like version control and integrated check-ins with work items so that the design time experience that I do both in SketchFlow as well as what might happen when I give a designer the initial project can be fully realized into our overall team development, whether you're doing something agile like sprints or doing more formal planning. The key to understand here is that we can work together when we do have a designer, but even if we don't have a designer, we don't have design skills. If we make those interfaces that make other people feel ill, we can at least, though, do the first part of the work with SketchFlow and not offend anybody's sensibilities. So let's take a look at how this works. By the way, I'll point out who you can blame that thing on later. All right. So let's fire up Microsoft Expression Blend. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that Blend starts up with this welcome palette. We'll look at this later. And a couple things to be aware of is, first of all, this black look is on purpose. A lot of people wonder, what is with these black user interface designs, right? You see them around different applications, and a lot of people have naively assumed it just means that people are just trying to use it as a way to differentiate professional versus amateur applications. It turns out the main reason is when you're working with any type of color scheme, you want to be able to visualize the colors as close to possible and how they react with each other without interference from the rest of the user interface. And black or dark interfaces, grays, right, are the lack of color. And so it helps you focus on, in what we, in Blend we call the artboard, which is where you're going to lay out controls. Now, the other thing I have to warn you about, of course, I'm running at a weird resolution here with this widescreen. You can fully adjust the Blend user interface just like you can Visual Studio. Now, one thing you have available to you in Tools Options is you'll notice that under Project, there's this option that says Use Microsoft Visual Studio, standard or higher, to create and edit event handler code if available. The key thing to understand about Blend is that it is primarily focused on the UX creation, the design, and the interaction, not the application logic. But occasionally, even that might need a little C# or VB.NET code. And so you can do your editing inside of Blend. There is a code editor. But if you don't want to use that, you can just go into Visual Studio for everything or occasional stuff. So that's just something I wanted to point out for you. And notice the code editor has some very basic stuff. But if you're used to Visual Studio 2010, there's no comparison, right? Visual Studio 2010 has the full-blown Ferrari version of IntelliSense. And this is kind of like a 69, well, probably a 69 VW when it comes to a feature set. So if I come over and create a new project, and we'll start with just, say, a WPF application. Right, this gives you the basic Blend user experience. But the great thing I can do here is I can come over to my solution, and I can select Edit in Visual Studio. And when I do that, it's going to open up the solution, and I can come in here, make changes as a developer, and do some initial work. And if I go back over to Blend, I will see that change. Okay, so it is designed to happily work back and forth. So you can do your code, you can do a lot of your debugging, your testing over there, yet still come over to Blend when you need to. The other key to understand about this is thinking back to our historical concept of what changed with HTML was this idea that, yes, with HTML and web server applications, we could have designers, the black turtlenecks, that build us the website with the flaming logos, etc. And they could lay out the HTML, use CSS and things like that, and we wrote the server-side code and a little bit of JavaScript or whatever, and we really didn't have to fight too much about it because they had the world, we had ours. In the workflow, they can do that same thing. They can stay in Blend. You don't ever have to go in Blend, which means that they need to be integrated into the full process. So if we come over here and we close the solution, we'll get rid of Visual Studio. I can open up a project on my hard drive that I have under version control. So for example, we'll take the solution. Now what you'll see here is that just like Visual Studio, I have the glyphs. It knows it's under version control. And if I want to, I can come in here, right, and go to my WPF application and check out this item. And I can come in here and work on the application just as I would in Visual Studio using the appropriate checkout mechanism you want to do. If you want to do exclusive checkouts, you can do that, or you can do shared checkouts. When you're working with XAML, I'm a big fan of exclusive checkouts for the XAML files. Right? Merging XAML, especially with the native built-in Visual Studio tools, not really quite pleasant. On the other hand, right, there's no reason why with your C#, your code behind VB.NET, that you can't do your shared checkouts. So that's a good thing to know, is that we have the ability to have that integrated workflow. So I can come in here and make a change. And we could say, change this, come over here, and go over here to common properties. And actually give us a name. We'll call this txt data. Save this. And I'll come over here and we'll check this in. And if you've used TFS version control, you'll notice this is a very familiar dialog box. Right? Updated name of control. Go to work items. I have access to the work items, check-in notes, policy warnings, as well as conflicts, just like it would in Visual Studio. And if you find a designer that understands this at the very basic level, you'll get along a lot better. Designers tend to have their own kind of version control mechanism. It's called lots of file folders and lots of save ases and lots of copying. And it's kind of demented and sad, and definitely not very social. So you really want to get them and do the basic training so they understand version control and how it works. We have a designer that we work with as a contractor, and he luckily is willing to use TFS, and so we can have a very happy lifestyle checking in, checking out code, and of course we're protected, right, because we have that version control to back us up. So it's nice to know that we have this. And yes, I can come over here and undo pending changes, and life is good. Beeble, bubble, bubble. All right. So in Expression Blend, there is a feature called Sketchflow. And the idea with Sketchflow is that you're going to use it to create a prototype, a concept of the application. This is your first step at user interface design. Because now, rather than approaching the application design from the requirement of what kind of code do I have to write, I'm going to sit down and think about how I'm going to gather information and present information to and from the user. I'm going to think about what is the start to finish workflow. And I'm going to try and involve the user in that process. And the key is, I'm going to use it to help break up my ideas without layering on top application goo. Right? There's this problem we've had fundamentally for a long time, and it started with Visual Basic, so I blame Alan Cooper. It's all his fault. Because when they created Visual Basic, what happened was they said, look, you have this great drag and drop metaphor. You can go in and lay out an application, and look, you can even put code behind. And then what happened next? People got a hold of your prototype and said 2 words. Ship it. Make it so. That's 3, but yes. Right? They said, let's take this and start using it. Because look, it seems to work pretty good. And they're like, no. This just yeah. And we've been fighting that battle ever since. So the cool thing with SketchFlow is that it currently supports WPF and Silverlight. But the thing to understand is that you can use it to prototype any type of application. Microsoft has different companies, including game designers and movie studios, using SketchFlow to help them prototype things out. Now, there is certain levels of usage model here that may not fit for all types of applications. But at the end of the day, a typical workflow is user is presented with a request for information, such as please log in, or they're given data right away. Right? That's the standard workflow no matter what the application looks like. Yeah, then we get to things like more traditional forms over data, okay, or more interactive, rich media applications, games, etc. But at the end of the day, there's a standard mechanism of displaying screen information, possibly having common data in the screens, and having some kind of workflow between them. So let's take a look initially at how we do this. So I'm going to come over here and say File, New Project. And I'm going to come over here and expand my WPF node. And you'll see I have an option for a WPF SketchFlow application. And so we'll call this Live ATL. And we'll put this in my TechEd folder so I can post it in case anybody wants to abuse it later. Now, if you take a look at what's going on here, in the center of the screen we have what's called the artboard. And inside the artboard is our first initial screen. You'll see the screen1.xaml. And what you see down here in the bottom is what's known as the SketchFlow map. This is where we're going to lay out the various screens and connect the dots, so to speak. So let's start out, we'll call this something like Welcome. Okay. And let's zoom out a bit. Now this is, of course, the problem here with low resolution. This is a good thing to request high resolution displays. 30 inches are good. Those of you in Tim Huckabee's session this morning heard there good some 40 inchers coming for an affordable price, so that'll be nice. So now I've got the basic design surface. Now this is one of those things that it's dangerous, right? Am I going to be building something that could be used right away? No, you're not. Now when you work inside Blend, you have this toolbar on the side that gives you access to things like controls. But you also can go to the Assets panel and see a variety of different items here. Now one of the items you'll note here is a SketchFlow section that if we expand has various items within it. And if you look at our controls, we have additional controls here. But if I come over here, one of the things you'll see here is I have a button. And it's labeled Button Sketch. Now when they first came up with this, they called them wiggly controls. Now they're just controls that have the SketchFlow style. And so let me zoom in on that. You'll see it's got this kind of hand-drawn look. And there's a method to the madness there. Right? We want people to understand this is not real. This is a representation of what we're thinking. Discuss with us, review with us. Okay. Now, if we think about our main screen, right, we often have things like button. We might want to have some kind of text. So we can come over here and get a label. And we'll move our label over. And you'll notice that I'm getting things like guidelines, all the good stuff that you would get in something like Visual Studio. Okay. And you notice you have a property sheet over here where you can adjust things, but once again, less is more. Right? Just get the initial stuff started. And so now we've got our first screen. It's a thing of beauty. Well, here's the great thing about this. I can press F5. And when I press F5, what I get is the SketchFlow player. And this is something I can give my users, and they can run it, and they can walk through the application experience. Now, at this point, not very interesting, but they can say, well, guess what? First screen looks great. Love it. Okay? So they can provide annotations, they can provide notes. Now remember, we have the ability to check this into source control, so we're going to be able to have version history, we're going to be able to associate this with work items, and track kind of our progress here. The other thing is you can publish these SketchFlow representations to things like SharePoint document libraries. So it's an easy way for users to be involved without having to be involved in your network and the developer side of the house. All right, so we got our first screen. So let's bring back the SketchFlow map. Let's see if we can add another screen. So I can come over here and create a screen. And we'll call this something like user info. Now, one of the things I can do with this is I can create a relationship between these screens. You'll see that I have this little glyph here down at the bottom that says connect to existing screen. So I can do something like that. And what I'm just doing is designing some kind of flow between the two. Now, the other thing I can do is oftentimes when you're building an application, you want to have a common set of controls or user interface elements, things like menus that drive navigation. So one of the things you can do is you can add a component. And you'll notice that it's dropped down on top of the design surface in the welcome screen. Because I've said I want to be able to use it in that particular screen area. So what I'm going to do here is give this a name, nav, and then we'll put this away for a little bit. And now we're going to move this out of the way, zoom out a little bit with the scrolling mouse wheel, and we'll put this over here on the side. And then I'll go back over here to my buttons. Whoops, I'm in the wrong one. We're going to go over here to nav. There we go. And we'll change this. So something as simple as that. And now if we go back to our welcome screen, we see it's there. Okay? So we're able to go through and not just define top-level screen relationships, but we can define pieces of reusable code. You think about web applications where you have a shopping cart experience, where you might have the ability to have the shopping cart available on multiple screens for adding and looking at items and editing, as well as final checkout stages. Okay. Now we're going to come back here, but I want to talk about a couple other things that we're going to use. So when we think about using Blend in SketchFlow, we see that we can use it to build Windows applications, so Windows Presentation Foundation applications. Contrary to popular belief, WPF is not dead. Most notably, they just shipped this little WPF application called Visual Studio 2010, right? So the idea here is you can use XAML to design your user interface and write your application logic in C# or VB, but because you're using the .NET framework, you have access to native functionality in Windows and all those great things that Windows provides out of the box, like built-in search capabilities, local database storage through SQL CE, SQL Express, the ability to work with Office automation with strongly typed objects rather than late binding. So there's a lot of good stuff there. Now, one of the things that happens when you start thinking about designing your application user interface is, yes, we need to think about the flow, but fundamentally, I like to have controls that have data in them and have some semblance of what it might look like, right? A list box, for example, a grid, it's one thing to say, user, oh, that's a grid. And they go, well, yeah, well, what will my data look like? Well, we're not there yet. That's going to take a couple weeks. So one of the great things about Blend is that you can go in and create sample data that supports design time and runtime data binding through SketchFlow in your application. That's pretty slick. The other thing we have in Blend is something called behaviors. Behaviors were primarily designed for designers so that they could create interactivity in the application, in the user interface, without having to write code. Out of the box, Microsoft ships a number of behaviors. There's more on the Community Gallery Center, and you can, of course, as developers, write your own. For example, there's a built-in behavior related to mouse drag and drop, and you can basically inherit from that base behavior and extend it to do all sorts of wonderful things. The key, though, is from the Blend experience and from being in Blend, is that I'm going to get interactive behavior without writing code. So this is something that we really like when we think about the designer-developer interaction, as well as we think about using SketchFlow, because I've got these buttons now, but I kind of want to hook my application together. I want to be able to make it do things. All right, so let's go back to our application. And let's go back to that user info screen. And let's give this a little more love here. So let's do something with another label here. As you can see, 9 points a little small, so we'll crank that up a bit. There we go. And we'll come over here and we'll get a button. In fact, we'll put this down here. And we'll call this Go Home. And then we'll come over here to our controls. By the way, you've got all sorts of wonderful shapes, so if you need to make it look pretty, you can do that. Whoops, come here. Come here. Let go. Yeah, I got it inside there. We'll just take that out. We didn't want that anyway, because that was garish user interface design. And we'll go over here to component. Where's my controls? And let's get a list box. There we go. Why won't it give me a list box? It keeps disappearing on me. There it is. Okay, we'll get a list box. Now, one of the things I want this list box then to present is a list of users, for example. So you'll notice over here, up in the upper corner, I have a Data tab. So if I go over to the Data tab, you'll see that I have the option for adding data specific to just a particular document element in my application or to the project at large. So I can come over here, and right up here in this little corner, you'll see there's an option to create sample data. So I select sample data, new sample data, and I'm going to give it a name for the data source, and we'll call this people. And once again, I can define it to the scope, either project or this document. I'll just leave it at the project level. And then notice the option here, enable sample data when application is running. For a SketchFlow application, that's what we want. And by the way, this sample data feature does apply to non-SketchFlow project types. So what you can do is have design time data, which is to help primarily designers and you do your layout work. But then at runtime, especially once you've got application logic implemented, you'll be able to fill in the data with real application information. So now you come over here and you'll see that we have this people object that's a collection, and it's a collection of items or properties. And so I can come over here and change the properties to things like full name. And I can come over here and call this phone number. Now, the thing about sample data, of course, is now, do you want to go and hand type a bunch of XML? Probably not. Not that you won't, Microsoft can't think of all the possible sample data options you're going to need, but they do have support for a lot of generic types of data that people are going to want. If we click this drop down right here, you'll notice that the default is everybody's favorite default text, lorem ipsum. And that's about all I know of the Latin. What that does just provides gibberish, meaningless text that's basically placeholder text. The key with the lorem ipsum text is it came from typography and the initial stuff to do basic typographical layout. And so it does have a basic semblance when you're doing page layout to the right number of characters you'd have in printed text, particularly when it's Roman characters. But we don't want that, so we're going to leave the data type as string. But you'll notice if I scroll down here, then I get a list of different types of data that they can auto-generate for me. So I have things like company names, email addresses, phone numbers. And as you'll notice right below what I've highlighted, I have the ability to pick names. Now come over here to the other option. Same thing. This is right now set to a Boolean, so I'm going to change the data type to string. Click the drop down, and we'll pick phone number. So at this point, I've defined that I want some sample data, and I want to be able to use it, but now where does it need to be bound to? Well, it's a matter of clicking on the collection object and drag and dropping it onto the control I want it data bound to. And there you go. That's pretty slick. So right away, I get an idea of how it will look with some data in it. Now, this is using the default template, which just says, OK, just alternate every data item one after the other. Now, what's interesting about this implementation is that it's not limited just to simple textual-based data types. I can come over here and say, you know what, instead of the phone number, let's change that. Let's change that to an image. And when I change it to the image, it says, OK, just provide us with some sample images that you want to use. So I can hit Browse, go out here to my pictures, select Sample Pictures, and we'll rebind it. And there you go. We now have images bound inside here. OK? Now, let's go back and look at our map. If we look at my SketchFlow map, what we have here is this idea of the navigation controls. We got this user info screen. And if we look at my navigation controls, we see I had two buttons, go to screen 1 and go to screen 2. Well, let's go over here. There we go. Now, if you take a look here with these various screens, we've got this ability to drag it to have the lines between them. And if I go back to the user info, we have this button hidden somewhere over here in the corner. Let's hide you. There we go. Lost my. There we go. And notice, built in, I have this option to navigate. Where do I want to go? In this case, I can navigate back, forward, or I can navigate to a specific control. In this case, the welcome control. So we'll take that. And this is using those behaviors. So if you take a look over here, notice what happened. Underneath my button, they added this navigate to screen action. A navigate to screen action is one of the built-in behaviors that comes with SketchFlow. And the way you can find them is to come up here to behaviors, and you'll see them on the list. Navigation is a core function of SketchFlow, therefore they have it off the context menu. Other items on the list, such as playing an animation, navigating to a URL, things like that, won't be. And so what you do instead is you would take them and drag them, drop them on top of the control you want them bound to, and then hook up the appropriate properties. So if we go back to our controls here, go to screen 1, I can set this to navigate to user info. And if we go back to our user map, we can insert another screen, and we'll call this system info. And we'll scroll out that, click there, and let's just get ourselves a button. And by the way, I'm holding down the button long enough to bring up the context menu to give me that option there. And there's our giant button, and we'll use this to navigate back to welcome also. All right, so I've gone through, I've got some sample data, I've linked up my screens, and I've hooked up behaviors with no code, so I should be able to do basic navigation between these screens. So I'll press F5, build succeeded. Now I'm on the Welcome to Our Wonder app. If I click to go to screen 1, it takes me to my user information screen. And you'll notice there's my sample data. Notice I can click, and I can scroll through the list. I can click Go to Home. That takes me back. And by the way, yes, there's a little animation there. If you look a little harder, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff on the transitions back and forth if you want. All right, so I gave you a little. And go back to screen 1. Oh, I didn't hook that up, did I? So let's go back. Go to User, Navigation Controls, go to Screen 2, navigate to System Info, press F5. And there we go. Okay? Now, the other thing that's cool about this is when you get to a richer implementation, which I'm going to show you in a second, one of the samples that's built in, is that I can click on this map option up here, and I can see an overlay that shows me all the controls and the relationships. So I don't necessarily have to go through the buttons, or if, like I did earlier, where I didn't hook up the relationship, I can jump right to that screen and take a look at it, and then close the map up. Okay? So when we think about building our user interfaces, using SketchFlow abstracts how we're going to do that. Yes, you're going to make some basic choices in the sense of if you know you're using WPF to build a rich desktop application, or you're going to use Silverlight because you want something that runs inside the web, maybe even out of the browser, or even later the phone, yes, you want to pick the appropriate one. But you could definitely pick the WPF basic styles for your SketchFlow application and prototype any application, even, God forbid, a Windows Form application or a native C++ app, a Java app. Because you're not defining core application logic and code, you're designing it as an expression of a prototype. Now, when you think about getting into these richer models, for example, if we go back to Blend, go to Help, and go to the Welcome screen, and go to Samples, you scroll down here, they have this snowboard sketch application. And if we run this one, they've done a lot more work here than I can do in a few minutes. And so I can come over here to the Welcome screen for this application. And you'll see they've done some styling. They've got a nice little gray background. They've done some notes here for the user. And then if I click on boards, you'll see they've got some nice pretty data here. They've even used one of the drag and drop behaviors that they include here to let me simulate what it's like to add items to a cart. I can navigate around, look at bindings, scroll through, see the different items that are available. I can even select Checkout. And you'll notice that with Checkout, I even got the items that I had originally dragged and dropped in the other item. So you can build something fairly rich. So the question becomes, what do you do? Well, it depends, right? Number one, obviously, if you're using SketchFlow to prototype an application that cannot be implemented from the XAML that you're defining, you throw it away. And sometimes that's what you should do anyway, right? Because the whole point was to separate that stage of gathering user experience from actual implementation. That said, if you are going to be moving on to one of the appropriate Microsoft implementations, it's about 11 steps in the help, and you can convert your SketchFlow application and SketchFlow styled controls to the standard built-in controls. And ultimately, of course, you can even replace things like the grid and those with maybe a third party that has richer functionality that you want. It's up to you to decide what makes sense in your organization. The key, though, is that you start with a mindset that you're building a prototype only, and that your goal is to interact with the user and figure out what's going on. How should the application look? How should it operate? Now, Silverlight, right, allows you to use XAML again, only this time you have the ability to deliver a cross-platform, cross-browser plugin solution, right, because that's what Silverlight's all about. And yes, cross-platform really just means today using Mac OS X. There's been some dramatic changes in the mono space. I encourage you to take a look at Miguel de Acaza's new project. They're looking to go even more serious with mono, so that and Moonlight could see some real Uber support on other platforms that end in an UX. But at the end of the day, Silverlight is still the same type, and we can do all the SketchFlow style stuff I just did for a Silverlight application and ultimately turn it into a real application. Now, one of the things that Blend supports that's available to Silverlight and WPF applications and Windows Phone 7 applications is the concept of a visual state manager. And the idea with the visual state manager is it allows you to define states for your objects and then use behaviors as one mechanism to link them together and control those states. Or you can obviously do code. Once again, it's going to be dependent upon how you're building your application if you're going to have access to a designer who knows how to use Blend versus you, the developer, who doesn't. You're going to probably feel more comfortable throwing on a few semicolons, writing a few end-if statements, than you will initially with doing it from a visual standpoint. But if you do have a designer who knows how to do it, they can do some really nice interactive experiences without you having to write code, and you can focus on a lot of the back-end stuff. So let's show you how you might do a simple implementation with a state manager. So I built a little solution just to have something to work with, and it's you can tell it was built by a developer. So let's go over here to HL Contacts, and we'll open up the Silverlight implementation. So right now, it is a tour de force of design. I'll press F5 and run it. It's going to run against my local web server. Hello? Well, one way to fix that. Aha. Looks like my page got screwed up. I'm running not as myself as a demo user. And let's do that. There we go. Save. Nice. I like that. Cannot download Silverlight, check your web server. That's always good. All right. Sorry about that, folks. There we go. OK. So nothing too exotic. What I'm doing here is getting people's full names. I'm using data binding. And then you get some details down at the bottom. OK? So what if I wanted to have it so that you could scroll through the list, but that bottom panel, which currently is just a stack panel, was only visible when the user wanted to see it? Well, you could write code to check conditions, or you could use the Visual State Manager. So the way we do this is we come in, and we'll give ourselves a little more real estate. Select our stack panel, go over here to States, and we're going to insert a new Visual State Manager. And we'll just take the default name. And you'll notice that we have basically default transition. And we can come over here and we can add new whoops, wrong one. go. And we'll come over here and we'll add a new state. And we'll call this hidden. And I'll add another one. Now what you'll see here is that when I have it on hidden, I'm going to come over here to the stack panel, which contains my various controls, and set it to collapsed. And so you'll notice right now in the current state, hidden state recording is on, and that means whenever the state is implemented, all of the properties and values of the control selected and its children will be affected. Now I'm just changing the visibility state, but I could do things like color, fonts, etc. And if I go to visible, I want to make sure it's set to visible. So I start with something like that, and then come up here and click base, and then now you see that it's visible. Now I might not want that, so we can come over here and change the default to be collapsed. And if we go check on hidden again, you'll see that's set correctly. But visible got switched back because I changed the base after, so I'm going to put this back to visible. So hidden, visible, default. All right. Now, when you're working with Blend, you have the ability to use all the graphical interface design tools, but yes, you can press F11 and F4, and you can feel a little more at home with the ability to edit XAML natively if you choose to. So for example, I can come in here and add another row definition. And I'm going to come over here and add a toggle button. And step back over. I can get split view, go back, and turn everything back on. And there's my toggle button right there. Come down here. I've access to all the stuff that I might want to do. I can do the content, show panel, for example. And now I've got my stack panel and the toggle panel. What I want to be able to do is when you toggle the button state, I want to be able to change that. So I can come over here to my behaviors, change property action, drag that onto my toggle panel, and I come over here and we'll set the control target, stack panel. And if we run this, my button is not showing up. That's right. So you see they went and wrote all the interactions for me. Make sure this shows up. Oh, thank you. I forgot to set the grid row, didn't I? Added the row, but did not set the. Go. Grid row definition. There's 0. Did I not change these yet? I did not. There we go. There we go. And I've got it completely screwed up. Well, seeing as I'm down to 9 minutes, I will post the fixed version for you. Because there's one last thing I want to talk about, which is Windows Phone 7, and show you something that's coming to make your life better. So Windows Phone 7 currently supports Silverlight, a variant of Silverlight 3. It's kind of like a Silverlight 3.25. Still writing your code in C# and VB. Still editing XAML. You have access to all the styles and same things that are available to you in WPF and Silverlight. But what's great about starting with the Windows Phone 7 is that Microsoft has created a set of design templates. Now, the built-in Windows Phone projects that are available do have some built-in templates that are trying to follow what Microsoft calls the Metro Design Guidelines. But if you really want to follow them completely, the Blend team has posted a set of Metro Design templates on CodePlex. And you can download them and give your application that full experience. Finally, you may have been wondering, well, what about SketchFlow for Windows Phone 7? The good news is that the Blend team has a set of templates that will be available, and it's currently tied to the Mango release. So once the tools are available in beta, you'll have those available. I have an early preview, so just to prove it that I'm not lying to you, File, New Project, Windows Phone, SketchFlow, and you'll have a Windows Phone SketchFlow template. And so you'll be able to come in here, and notice they've even got you set up with a default screen experience. And we zoom out. You'll see there's a home screen, app list, etc. So we'll F5 this. So the only thing to be aware that's different is that because of the current implementation, it's going to run in the SketchFlow player through Silverlight, not directly in the emulator, but it's going to give you that ability to have that application look and feel that your users want for the phone, and you can go through the same prototyping experience with SketchFlow for your phone as you do for Windows, for WPF and for Silverlight. So that's pretty cool. So at the end of the day, providing a quality experience is not bolted on. Start slowly, a little goes a long way. And the real call to action for you is to use Blend and SketchFlow to get started. There's a lot more to user interface design. For example, color theory. If you're interested in color theory, check out Kuler.com, Kuler.com. There's even a Blend plugin that allows you to get color swatches from Kuler without leaving the IDE. Think about user tracking, how their eyes work. The marquee is horrible because it's forcing the user to constantly move across the screen. There's lots of books, there's lots of articles out there on the net. It's up to you, though, to decide if that's something you want to invest in. It doesn't just happen naturally, and that's what I think a lot of people expect, that the tool is going to help you build pretty applications. There's not a hidden option that I didn't show you today in Blend that says, make my application look bitchin'. Okay, it doesn't exist. All right? But SketchFlow is something that you can use to really sit down and come up with what the user wants to see. Yes, if you can get a designer and someone knows what's going on, they could probably do amazing things for you. But at the end of the day, if you just make the step of experience, not that it's pretty, but that it works the way they want to work, and that you discover things that they really hate modal dialog boxes. They really hate the fact that they have to go to one screen to always get that piece of information when they'd like to see it on 3 screens. Those are things that you can discover using a visual tool and just a little bit of creativity. So code with care, but design with care. Thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of Tech Ed.